Good evening to everyone. Welcome back to those of you who have faithfully joined us for the past 2 nights. This is the third and final of our Leon Levy lectures in Jewish material culture here at the Bard Graduate Center. Here, where we study the human past and cultural history through their material traces. Our MA and PhD students do this work together with our faculty and fellows, cognizant of our own location in time and space. We're here in 3 landmarked Upper West Side buildings in the heart of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral territories of the Lenape people, and 1 block away from the former site of Seneca Village, a community of African American and immigrant property owners that was forcibly relocated to create Central Park. This is a neighborhood in a city, in a country long comprised of global migrants and refugees from war and violence and economic dislocation. So in these temporal, spatial, and thematic contexts, I'm honored to introduce tonight's speaker, who is familiar to many of you, Jonathan Ben-Dov, who will address us on his research on text and material culture in ancient Judea. Dr. Ben-Dov is professor in the Department of Bible at Tel Aviv University, where he studies the interconnectedness of ancient cultures. His work explores biblical literature and the Dead Sea Scrolls, among other forms of Israelite and Jewish literature, in comparison with the cuneiform corpus from Mesopotamia, as well as with Greek and Roman literature. He's also looked at evidence of the knowledge of natural sciences through early Jewish texts dealing with astronomy, astrology, calendars, that was the subject of our first lecture, and medicine. His other area of focus is literacy and writing in the Bible and in Jewish literature, positing models for the development of the early text of the Torah. He has a long and distinguished career. He's been a research fellow at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, which is here across the park, and the Institute of Advanced Study at Durham University. He's received many, many awards and grants, including the prestigious Michael Bruno Award from Yad HaNadiv. And this semester, he is serving as the Sigi Feigl Visiting Professor of Jewish Studies in the Faculty of Theology at the University of Zurich. So he's here from Switzerland. He's published widely on calendrical texts, the history of Jewish sciences, and early text of the Torah, and is currently co-director of the German-Israeli project Scripta Qumranica Electronica, which aims to enhance the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls using digital humanities techniques. So this is the third of the lectures, as I said, and tonight we will hear about scrolls as matter, as material artifacts. Sorry, I was reading my scrolls as material artifacts. So please join me in welcoming, for the third time, Jonathan Ben.
Thank you, Deborah. You're very kind as always. You even mentioned things I forgot.
Well, there was so much more. This is a very, very
Thank you so much.
short version of all of his accomplishments.
Yeah, and thank you, friends, for coming over. We are speaking about texts and materials. Yes, this is what we do now, texts and materials. We have actually spoken, in the last days, we've spoken about different kinds of materials, spoke about material time, and we spoke about rock-cut monuments and their connection with mythology, so that was a completely different story. But now, this is more what I do presently. So this is the kind of things we will see today are keeping me busy in the coming, as we speak. So I'm especially excited about that. As you might have heard, I work on the Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran, and I do a lot of work about them. And a lot of the work I do is trying to treat the scrolls as artifacts. People do it today, and many people are doing it even more seriously than I do. But I just want to present what could be done when thinking about the scrolls as material artifacts. I actually was very happy to see just here outside on display, a nice volume published by Bard Graduate Center about codices. So the codex, the Roman codex as an artifact. So look it up on your way out. So I'm happy to connect to that item, and which also seems to me that the way I connect to the work done here in Bard Graduate Center. So I'm very happy to be around because it seems to me that things chime in very well. So let me start by this. But this is which is another venture of the Leon Levy Foundation. So that's a connection to what we do now, because this is the Leon Levy Foundation lectures. So the foundation has funded this wonderful, beautiful website of the Israel Antiquities Authority that gives you wonderful survey and gives you access to all of the images of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran scrolls, but actually not only from Qumran, other sites in the Dead Sea. It's beautiful. Go through, look at it. It's just wonderful, and there's so much material that's there for the public. So not only, I mean, some of it is like very specialized, but a lot of material is out there for the public, and you will find a lot. But I especially like this picture here of the gentleman. I think it's Lancaster Harding, one of the people, the first scholars of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I'm not sure about his name. Look at what he has next on his desk. These are not scrolls. We call them Dead Sea Scrolls, but these are actually fragments. Look how many fragments. And these are the fragments brought over, yes, on each of those plates on the desk. There are 5, 6, 7, 50 fragments, and this is the way most of the Dead Sea Scrolls reached the place where they first collected in East Jerusalem at the French School of Archaeology in East Jerusalem. So this is what the scholars have been doing, playing jigsaw puzzling with all of these scrolls over there, which means that thinking about scroll as just text would not do justice to them, because of course these are texts, as you can see. But when you look at the fragments, you'll see that some of the fragments just have, a word or 5 letters or 3 lines with 5 letters in each or something like that. And we spend our time doing detective work through that. So which means what we must stop to reflect about what we do. We can't just use textual additions. Please join in, and there's some place in the front and also in one of those lines. Yes, welcome. So that this is just to get you in the atmosphere of the kind of work that we're doing, and the mode of reflection that should be employed about it. So Qumran, we're speaking about the site of Qumran. Let me say just a few things about them, about that site. So here we are, the Dead Sea. And so we are at the north end of the Dead Sea. The name Qumran is not an ancient name. It's more or less modern Arabic name. The meaning of the name is not completely known. Some people say it's connected somehow to the moon because of the bend of the moon, which somehow relates to that in Arabic. I'm not sure. I don't know. But anyway, there is a site, an archeological site of Qumran, but the main interest is not the actual site itself, but rather the caves that are along the cliffs next to Qumran, so about a few kilometers north and south of it. There are cliffs, and within that cliff you can find a few caves, like, for example, this famous one. Here we call it Cave 1. This is the first cave found. I think the story is well known. I mean, just look it up, The Bedouin, it sounds like a legend, the Bedouin shepherd who takes his flock and throws a stone, and the stone falls into something, and he says, oh, it's a cave, and he's found the scrolls, and then the story moves on. Actually, the big opening you see there at the bottom was done by scholars, by excavators, or by the Bedouins, but the original cave was actually sealed, and the only opening was up there at the top, and that was a lot smaller. So this is really where they put scrolls for preserving, and actually they were preserved for 2,000 years. The scrolls were found inside jars like this one. The size is a bit misleading, the scale, because this jar is about 80 centimeters high, something like that. But in cave one, this one, they found about 50 jars of scrolls, but not all of them reached us, and not all of the jars were filled with scrolls. But to cut a long story short, these are scrolls from the time of the Second Temple period. So this is the time we discussed in our first talk about the sundials. So more or less Roman Judea, maybe a bit earlier than that. So Roman Judea. It's a very interesting and important relic, and it's the largest library known to us from ancient Judea, and actually one of the largest libraries of that survived from the ancient world. About 900 scrolls altogether throughout the caves. That's a lot. I don't know how many libraries were there in Judea at the time with 900 volumes. This is a very big collection, and we scholars are spending a lot of time doing things that could be done with that collection. Having said that, I will move on. So you can imagine the big excitement that was there when these things were found, and this is the New York Times from 1948. 10 ancient scrolls found in Palestine. Books of Isaiah and Daniel are among 10 items in Hebrew written about AD 70. So a lot of it is incorrect, we can now say. It's not AD 70, it's a lot before AD 70, and it's much more than 10 ancient scrolls. But I'd like to say something about the books of Isaiah and Daniel. So, of course, the public imagination, the public interest about these scrolls was really, of course, the content. You wanted to know what's written in these scrolls, and actually many of the scrolls were biblical books. And there was one big, very large scroll, which we will now see, that has the text of Isaiah, and some smaller scrolls that have fragments of the text of Daniel and so on. But so I want to embrace that kind of interest, but then take you further beyond it. So actually, this is a very exciting scroll. It's on display in the Israel Museum. This is the big scroll of Isaiah, where you have the entire, it's cut in this image, it is cut into pieces, but actually it's one long continuous scroll, about 7.5 meters long, with all the text of Sefer Yeshayahu, the book of Isaiah. It's the oldest Hebrew copy of the book of Isaiah, predating the second latest copy of Isaiah, second earliest copy of Isaiah by a millennium. Because before that book was there, we only had medieval copies of Isaiah, and this is really a first century, maybe about 100 BCE. Yeah, so this is actually very exciting. And we could really, and there was a lot of research done on the actual content of this scroll. Here is another full, complete scroll found in Cave 1. This is not a biblical book. It's a book of the community that lived in the site of Qumran. It's their mode of conduct and the penal code of the community and the organizational code and how you can be accepted and how you are thrown out if you did anything bad, and the annual covenant and so on. So these are, materially speaking, look at this. This is very interesting because we now have a look at through a material culture that we didn't know of. I mean, how did biblical books look in the first century BCE? So here it is. And we scholars are interested in any detail of it, so we could be interested also in this pattern of preservation, like this. Because as you can imagine, if you take a piece of paper, like a scroll, and then you make some damage in it, like this, so the damage goes on, yes, one after one, it goes on through the rolls of the scroll, and I can tell you that we can make the calculations and can calculate the difference between this interval and that interval. Yes, the difference grows as the scroll goes on, and we use it to reconstruct scrolls, as you will later see. Other scrolls were less lucky. So here is a very famous scroll on the right top side. This is how that big scroll of Hodayot was found. Hodayot is a genre of religious lyrical poetry, unknown outside Qumran. Beautiful texts, very long devotional, personal texts. But this is how, it's a very, we call it, it's a very big scroll from Cave 1, but this is how it was found. So interesting, what happened? How did it get into that situation, and so on and so forth? And it took like 40 years to put together the order of the fragments and pull them away from this patch and put them down in the right order. And as you know, and this is the nightmare of every scroll restorator. Look at the guy who's smoking a cigarette while working with the fragments. Yes, that's a very famous event. But what I'm trying to say is that the scrolls, of course, are amazing in terms of their content, but we're not here to discuss the content of the scrolls. They attest not only to a variety of content, but also to material variety. And limiting ourselves to the content of the scroll does not exhaust the information we can deduce from it. This is what I want to present to you today. So we have this extraordinary variety of scribal material and practices revealed to us in this collection. As I said, we have 900 scrolls. So this is just in a nutshell, a few exciting examples. So on the left, a large scroll written on copper. Actually, this is the original scroll. They couldn't open it when they found it, so they had to cut it, like to saw it, and then. So this is just a copy, a recreation of that scroll. It is written on copper. It's very unusual, and the content is even more unusual. It's kind of a treasure map telling about where the treasures of the temple were hidden. Don't go looking for it. People have tried and did not succeed, but I'm just bringing it for the variety of the material. And this nice interesting scroll preserves the patch and a bit of the string used to tie the scroll while in storage. This actually, for me, it's exciting because I want to know about the books, not only what they contain, but I also want to know how they were handled and what people did with it and how did the bookshelf look like. Because I think that's important, as I intend to show you. So look on the right-hand side. This is a piece of tefillin, so phylacteries. It's a piece of skin in which several biblical passages are written, and then they are folded very closely and placed into a phylactery. I guess most of you know what it is. So the script in this scroll, if you can call it a scroll, the letters are about 1 millimeter high. So it was written with a brush, with one hair of the brush, and it's about 1 millimeter high. And usually it was done with leftovers of skin. So when they prepared the large sheet of skin for use, they took the leftovers and wrote tefillin on it. This is what we can say today, which is an interesting concept for those who study the history of tefillin. Because today people would think actually that for a ritual object you would use very luxurious parchment prepared in advance, while in those days they would just use the leftovers to write the tefillin. Actually, the content is also in a very less careful way written. A variety of scripts. This is not, most of the scrolls were written in the square Hebrew script known to us, more or less. But some scrolls were written in the Paleo-Hebrew script used in earlier biblical times or the development of that. I just want to say that most of the images here are taken from this Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls digital library. It's a wonderful resource. Look it up. Just to show you the variety. This is a scroll I did a lot of research on. I will try to say something about it later. So first of all, this is written on papyrus, not on skin. Papyrus used to be the writing material in earlier times. It comes from Egypt. It is made of the plant of papyrus. It still was at the time the main writing material for Greco-Roman writings. So copies of Plato were written on papyrus. Actually, most of the scrolls in Qumran were written on skin. I wouldn't say parchment because parchment is a technical term that has not been reached at that stage, but they were written on we can call it skin. This one was written on papyrus, but to make things even more exotic, they were written in code. So a kind of a cryptic script that you would see on the right-hand side. So even those of you who read Hebrew cannot read what it says there. But this one here on the left, this is where they wrote the title of the scroll. So imagine you have a bookshelf with 20, 50, whatever scrolls, and you want a specific scroll. So today you want to go to the bookshelf and on the the side of the books they have the titles. But how do they do it with scrolls? So with scrolls they would write the title on the back end. Yes. So this is what we found on that tiny piece of papyrus. It's about 2 inches big. That's the size or something like that. So this one has the title. I might have put somewhere about it later on in the display, but it says Midrash Sefer Moshe. So some kind of midrash or expansion on the book of Moses. Interesting, interesting. So what is the book of Moses? I might say something about it later. This is a scroll in Aramaic that has astrological content. It's actually, so if you wanted to know the names of the horoscope signs in Aramaic, this is where you would look for. It shows us that Jews in Second Temple times were interested in astrology. That's not so much, for some people it might be a surprise. But anyway, I brought it for the material variety, not so much for the content. It's not a very high scroll. It's like 10, it's the piece, despite the scale here, it's about 10 centimeters high. That's it. So it's like a very thin, it's like this height, yes, something like that. It's a strip of parchment. They used it to write literary texts, very different from the Isaiah scroll that we saw. So today, in present day research, that people are very happy to use this translated. Some people read the original French, but most people read the translation of this text by Gérard Genet. So he's a French literary critic, and he wrote about paratexts. Paratexts means that when you look at the scroll, so you should be interested not only in the actual content of that scroll. Of course, that's important. But if you really want to understand the scroll, you should really be interested in anything that's around the text. So we can study the scrolls using what we call media studies. It's a piece of media. So what kind of media was used and what strategies are used to convey it, and why use this kind of media and not other media? And the famous slogan by McLuhan, the medium is the message. So studying the material of the scroll is not just a side interest of those boring scholars who are interested in codicology. It's an important thing, because if you know that this Torah scrolls are written on a different material than astrology scrolls, then that's interesting. And if you have a copy of the Torah written on a small scroll, that would be interesting. Why is that happening? So we should really dedicate attention to that. And each single manuscript is a unique historical artifact. So it used to be the case that people said, look, we have 35 whatever copies of the book of Psalms. Fine. And they would read all of that, and they would bring textual variants in the book for the book of Psalms. Fascinating. But each of these 35 copies of the book of Psalms is really an artifact. And if you look at them closely, you will see that most of them are not actually copies of the book of Psalms, but rather copies of a section of the book of Psalms, or one psalm, or just a small collection of it, or a part of it. So it would be wrong to say that they are the book of Psalms. They are an artifact that contains some of it, but you just need to ask a different question. So people were not always asking the right questions. So we should be interested in the image, and the layout, and the script, and the marginal marks, and the writing material, the size of the scroll, the material of the ink, and many more. And I will try to expose you to some of that without making anyone fall asleep as we do it. So even some people are trying, I will show you, try a biography of a given scroll. There is this new term, impagination. Impagination, so the way a page is constructed. You could actually use it's an enlightening term. And you can speak about manuscript architecture once you use media studies to look at these manuscripts. So the architecture of the manuscript, and a very term that people use in it's a German term, Schriftbildlichkeit, so iconicity of script. So look at, imagine those nice medieval manuscripts with drawings, and when they took the first letter and drew it in a colorful way and so on. So letters can also be icons. So we should study the iconicity of the script, and there's stuff to be done about it. So what we have in recent years is that codicology, Codicology is the science of manuscripts, manuscript science. That was a matter for experts, and I would say kind of very esoteric. But in the recent maybe decade or so, codicology has revived, and it has become very cool for people to actually study manuscripts. And there are centers for the study of manuscripts in all sorts of places. Yeah, mainly Germany, because they have a lot of money for that. But elsewhere, and people are interested in codexes, in manuscripts or in scrolls, and this is what we will try to do today with some test cases. So here is a project of a friend of mine in Università Svizzera Italiana. He's doing a biography of the Great Isaiah Scroll. Look at these close-up images of the Great Isaiah Scroll. You can actually see the seams, yes, and you can actually see the texture of the skin and the texture of the ink. It's three-dimensional all of a sudden. And when writing a biography of the Great Isaiah Scroll, I think he's reached very interesting results that we didn't know before. Actually, for example, he says it was written as two different scrolls, divided after chapter 33, not chapter 39, but divided after chapter 33, two separate scrolls that were then later joined. So biblical scholars, like some of them sitting here, would be very interested in that find. So you could really make this is a unique scroll, fully preserved and very interesting. You can see where it was corrected and when it was corrected and the patches that were done in the scroll and so on and so forth. And that would really teach us a lot about the book of Isaiah. So it will teach us a lot about the biography of the book of Isaiah. Yes, okay, so he gave me that slide and it's a very nice one. Okay, so I'd like to just take you through 2 or 3 test cases, and it depends on really our time. But one thing that comes out in the scroll is the Judean writing tradition, and I'd like to show you through some slides about how we understand the tradition of writing that is presented there in the scrolls. So look at this very interesting guy. This is an Egyptian scribe of the 3rd millennium BCE. He's a scribe. How do you know he's a scribe? Because he's holding a pen in his hand. But he does not have a desk, because desks were not invented until the late antique period or early medieval period. And Egyptian scribes wrote on their, you call it a kilt, maybe a skirt, yes? So that was his desk. He had a kilt, and he took the scroll of papyrus and put it on his kilt. This is why papyrus scrolls are hardly ever taller than 30 centimeters. Yes, that is the size that could fit into the kilt. He couldn't write a whole scroll like that. He would write just one sheet of papyrus, and then they would glue them together. But this is the mode of writing through a lot of the ancient world. This is Egypt, but it pertains to many other. So look at this image here, for example. Up there you have an Egyptian scribe holding the sheet of paper in his hand and writing on it. So that might be just one page, or he's writing like a record of some war or something. This is the one here is not Egyptian, rather it is Assyrian. In this Assyrian image from about the 7th century BCE, you see 2 scribes in the back. They are writing down the booty of a war. So all of the things that were taken during the war. This is a close-up. One of them is writing cuneiform on a tablet, so pressing his stylus in the tablet. The other one is using a pen or brush to write on a piece of papyrus. He's doing alphabet. This is an alphabetical scribe. So we see some of this. So how to write and how does a scribe look? These things are developing, leading us to what we will find in the Judean material from Qumran. So the Aramaic alphabetic writing tradition was established in the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And this is a document from the Persian Empire where they established the Aramaic writing tradition. Actually very exciting. It was only discovered published maybe a decade ago. It was not excavated. It reached the market through somehow. This is Aramaic script from which the Hebrew script developed. It's a letter found in Afghanistan where there was a Persian government, and this is an official administration letter, and this is how it looked like. We actually have a date, June 347 BCE, because it's dated. The interesting thing about it, and you can't see here, the interesting thing is that the letters are very big. Every letter is is more than a centimeter high. Every letter. So how much text can you fit in? One of the questions we ask ourselves, how did they create biblical books? You know, the book of Genesis, the book of Psalms. You need a big scroll to contain all of that information. It's about media studies. As long as you write with this kind of tradition, you can't fit that much text on such a page, even if you had a lot. And look how much leaving a lot of white space means this is an imperial. They have a lot of resources. They don't need. They could spare a lot of parchment. They could spare a lot of skin, but still, this is the Aramaic writing tradition that was established. This is setting the scene to Qumran. Here is another document from the same writing tradition. This is a literary text found in Egypt in Aramaic. It's the Achikar story, whatever. But I've seen it in an exhibition in Berlin last week. I was lucky to be there. It's amazing. It's a huge page, and each letter is like a centimeter high. That's very big. You can't contain a lot of information on a page if you use these practices. This is the end story. This is a Jewish medieval Sefer Torah, Jewish medieval book of Torah, one of the earliest known to us. Look how dense this is. Yes, can you see? It's an 11th, 10th century Sefer Torah, something like that, kept in the Book of Congress. Look at the difference between this one here and this one here. This is industrial. This is meant to contain a lot of information in it. So what happened? How did the writing tradition advance or change from this item to this item in a millennium or so? What we have in Qumran is really the midway that led us through them. There are many transitions. Transition from papyrus to skin. Transition from writing with a brush to writing with a pen. Think about it. As long as you write with a brush, letters are larger. They are more coarse. If you write with a pen, you can fit more information. And so it's a lot about technology. Square rather than rectangle, I'll show you that, allowing for a larger writing block, higher density, longer scrolls, and thus also longer books. Was there a single scroll of the Book of Psalms, of the Torah? Could you technologically put together the entire Torah on one scroll? You could absolutely not put a scroll of the entire Torah, the 5 books of Moses, on a papyrus scroll. But you could do it maybe on a parchment, on a skin scroll. Maybe, not sure, but you could. Yes, today it is, but with the technology of the 2nd century BCE, some people say you could. Scholars are debating that. So let's look at some examples. These are the earliest scrolls from Qumran, 3rd century BCE. Look at that copy of the Book of Enoch we saw yesterday. This is written with a brush. This is the one on the left, so different from the regular scrolls we see elsewhere. And this one here on the right hand, it just so happened, look at the correction, you see? Yeah, that's nice. I like this scroll because the scribe missed a lot of text from chapter 8 of Jeremiah, and then he entered it, but you see the way he entered it. Yes, that's nice. But this is one of the earliest scrolls, and a later study has shown, which we will see, that this was written on skin of cattle, so cow, which is unusual because mostly they used coats. Look at this wonderful scroll. How small the script is. This is only 18 centimeters high, but it contains about 50 lines. This is songs of so it's a liturgy of prayers for Shabbat, mystical prayers for Shabbat, but the content is not what matters for me now. What matters to me now, look how small the script is and how different it is from the one we saw, the Aramaic one we saw, that's only 200 years earlier, but look how different it is. So there's a lot to do with the media of the scrolls. Later scrolls from the Dead Sea, from the Judean desert, are already closer to what we know from the stabilized Judean writing tradition of medieval times. This is one from Nachal Chever, from next to Engedi. So it's not Qumran, and it's like a century or two later. And you can see that it's becoming standardized. Late scrolls from Qumran, like this beautiful Psalm scroll, we will return to it. They are like they're moving towards the standard Jewish model, and so on and so forth. So there's a procedure here that takes a lot about technology and about transitions in the mode of writing, which actually created the Jewish book culture that we know. We will skip this, and this is what I want to show you, that scribal practices reflect the identity of the writers. The choices of the script and the writing layout were deliberate, often rejecting other potential models. So tracing these little details of what script you use and what scrolls you use and so on, they could lead you to very wide-ranging conclusions about the identity of the people who wrote it. This is, I think, the end of this chapter, and we move to another short chapter where I will show you the kind of material scientific study done on the scrolls. So people were studying the chemical analysis of the ink. Now, why is that important? It's important because, for example, people are asking, are all the scrolls written in Qumran on the shores of the Dead Sea, or maybe some of the scrolls were written elsewhere? This has implications because we want to know whether the site of Qumran, whether the scrolls were written in Qumran or not, and whether they were written by the sect in Qumran, or as some people say, they were written, actually, some people actually say this is the temple library of Jerusalem. This theory is known in research. Some people say it's, so we can check the ink and to see how much, bromide or whatever chemical it contains, and then we would see if it was prepared in Qumran or not. So actually, the ink of this scroll, they say that it was prepared in Qumran. And then I can't remember what the results of this found of this research here, but this is a genetic study of the DNA of the actual skins. So this is how, for example, they discovered that that scroll was written on cattle skin rather than on goats, and they could say how many different herds of goats were used, and so on and so forth, and they could even say something about the provenance of some of the animals used for that. And these things have historical implications. So the temple scroll, a very big, important scroll from Qumran, was actually, as they could say now, the skin was not prepared in Qumran because they analyzed the chemical analysis of the actual skin and they discovered it was not done in Qumran. So these are the things that could help us in historical research. Then another case study. I don't know how much you ask yourselves about the spatial division of poetry. Do you know when people write poetry, there's this movement of a line, there's a term in English for that. Enjambment? Do you use that? Yes, enjambment. So you have something like that in literary texts, and it teaches you also about, I think this one is important because it teaches you about the way they understood the texts. So in biblical poetry, it is very common to write in parallelism. God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and, well, you can debate the translation here. I translated abounds with stability. It's not very good English, but this is the way I understand it. But the idea is that this is a sentence divided into two. The people who wrote these poems in the Psalms, they really got it. They wrote a parallel sentence with two sticks, as they call it. I don't know how to pronounce this word. So the people who wrote the biblical poems actually they knew about that. But most copies of the Psalms from Qumran, they just write the Psalms in one continuous prose. So they did not. So what does that mean? That they did not know about the parallelism? They did not understand it? They did not care for it? Or they knew about the parallelism, but they never came to the idea to present it graphically? So most of them just present the parallelism in continuous prose. But look at this. This is a copy of a specific psalm where it does not present the parallelism, but it does present every verse in a new line. So this shows something about this graphic presentation. Remember, we spoke about architecture of the page. So this shows that people really understood something. There's a cognitive thing happening. People understood that you must present every new verse in a new line. Now look at this scroll of the Psalms from Qumran. They understood, they actually divided it into the sticks of the parallelism. But what they did is that they wrote this one stick after the other in one column. This is Psalm 103. So they did understand it, but they did not write the parallel sticks one next to the other. Rather, they wrote it one underneath the other. Then eventually in this scroll from Masada, you actually get the sticks written in parallel, one next to the other. So one could say, well, this is just a technical thing. What do I care about that? But it's actually not technical. It has to do with the way people understood the Psalms. Did they notice the parallelism or not? Could they follow it or could they not follow it? So maybe the first ones did not know about parallelism and then somebody discovered it. So this is really, so the way things are put on the page is really relevant for what we can know about them. And this is the final chapter. I think it's also the end of the lecture series. So I'm just presenting some nice fragments from my past research. This is a calendar, a piece of a calendar from Qumran. And I like it because look at the piece of paper, the piece of skin that is sewn here. So the sewn here and here. It's a very small piece of parchment. It's like the entire, it's now blown up, it's huge, but the size of this one here is probably 5 centimeters, something like that. So the entire scroll, it's a very long scroll, but it consists of leftovers. So they took pieces of skin. This is very unusual. Usually in Qumran, they would take a big sheet and write 4 columns of big text. This one was really, so for that scroll, they just used the leftovers and they wrote scroll on it. This is another scroll. I like it because of this one. Can you see? Do you understand what this is? It's the leg of the animal.
Leg of the what?
So when they prepared the sheet of parchment, there was the leg of the animal, so they couldn't. So they skipped some of the writing around it. So, but this comes to teach us that a support, we call it a support, on which text was written, could not be taken for granted, because for us, of course, in the computer age, but also in the printed age, I mean, it's just a paper, the text is continuous and that, but this is really an artifact. It's a piece of matter, of material, and sometimes it was not easy to get a complete, full, nice sheet of parchment, and people had to play those tricks and to use this kind of material, actually in a very nicely written, very luxurious scroll, but that's what they could get. Fine, I think it's the final example. It's another fragment of papyrus written on code. It's a copy. Of course, how many letters are there? Maybe 20? Yes, but we could work it out to see that it's a copy of one of the organizational codes of the community, Serech HaEdah. So this little fragment was wrongly put together by a scholar in the 1950s, huge, amazing, wonderful, genius scholar who joined many fragments, but this little fragment, he just joined it the wrong way. And when we, and this is all tiny, I mean, it's like each of these 2 pieces. This is another one, but I'm talking about this one that was wrongly joined. Each of the pieces is like 1 inch wide, something like that. But he made the wrong join, and we divided the fragments, and we put them in the right order and joined them with another fragment, and we got to this. And as it turns out, it turns out that actually this tiny little thing turned out to be very important because the original copy did not contain, yes, the original copy did not contain the section on marriage. This is what we learned from this fragment. So that the original scribe, when he wrote that organizational code, he did not know or he left out the section on marriage. If you talk to scholars of Qumran, they would be, wow, devastated with that because it's a big question whether people in Qumran were celibate or not. So the effort we spent, and we spent a lot of effort on this tiny fragment, just shows us this is the section, yes? So this is the full section from a full copy with the marriage section, and this is without the marriage section. And you can see that somebody else came over and filled in the marriage section here. I'm not giving the translation, but it speaks about women. So somebody came and filled it in afterwards. So when you do small material research, these are the things you can get to. I can share with you this publication that we did with AI. It's an age of AI, yes. So we have to. I can't give a full series without speaking about AI, right? So there was a computer scientist trying to do an automatic assembly of fragments of ancient papyrus. So this was a nice publication. We did some, I think, nice preliminary results. We should continue it forward. And I want to show you the kind of canvases we create with just Photoshop or anything, with all of the students who work on these things. I think that's nice. It's like, and all of these are using the scrolls as media, yes. I mean, and you just use Photoshop to put it together, yes. And now I wrote down some final reflections, and I think this is really where I need to be done. But so my first thought here was really thinking about, it's text and material. So usually when you look at an image and a text, so you're saying, so which is the main one? Which is accompanying which? So often when you look at the book, you would say the main thing is the text, and there are some illustrations that accompany the text, like a math book or geometry, whatever. It could be the other way around. In the first two talks, I think it was the opposite, because in the first two talks we had the first 2 days, the material was the main thing with the text. Like, think about those Akkadian inscriptions in Lebanon that we saw yesterday. Yes, I think the image was the main thing, and the letters were just auxiliary, were less important. But it could be the other way around, and there's a dynamic between text and material, and we should not neglect that dynamic, also as we saw today. The other thing is I want to speak, so in all of the talks, we actually tried to consider the Jewish material culture together with other material culture that was not Jewish. Remember, we had those cuneiform texts, and we had Roman sundials, and we had the Persian Aramaic writing tradition, and so on. So how do we consider the connections between them? Or should we, I made the case for studying the Jewish material culture as part of the wider material culture that it is. Now, people often use the word influence. So Jews were influenced by, Babylonian inscriptions, Roman sundials, Aramaic writing tradition. But I think influence is the wrong word. Jews were creative agents, cultural agents. They were part of the world they lived in. Judeans, they were part of the world they lived in. They absorbed some ideas, but they also contributed some ideas to the region around them. The Jewish mythology we spoke about yesterday, the Jewish writing culture. So we should really stop thinking in terms of influence, because it's more than just influence, kind of hybridity, coexistence. I could think of many better words than just the word influence in the way you consider material culture, the Jewish material culture and wider material cultures. I should admit that, the material examples of Jewish material culture we saw in this series were not the avant-garde of the world at the time. They were not as nice and as luxurious as the Assyrian sculptures or paintings, or as the Assyrian writings, or the Roman sundials, or whatever. So the Judean culture was maybe a bit modest because of the resources of the Jews at the time and so on, but it still is important, and sometimes we can learn about the wider world from what we know on this small, modest Jewish material. So we've seen material time, we've seen material knowledge, we've seen basically what we saw is that well, I'll just return to the cliche, the medium is the message. So when we consider texts, we must always look through the medium that is written, the medium that contains them, the medium that surrounds them. And if that would be the last important line, the bottom line of this series, then I'm happy to say it again. Thank you again, my hosts in the Bard Graduate Center.
We have time for some questions. If anyone has a question.
I was wondering about the material of the string that was used to sew the pieces together, and not only that in general, but how that might have changed over the different periods and eras of time.
Actually, there is a lady, an archaeologist, who's now writing a dissertation in that University of Lugano about the seams of the Great Isaiah Scroll. To me, I admit that the idea seemed to me a bit far-fetched, but she says it's important. She could derive important stuff from it. This is all organic material. It's animal, sinews. Yeah, what's the word? Sinews. It's all. I mean, they didn't use plant-based material. It's all animal sinews. Yes. What kind of animals and so on? I guess you could talk to the lady if you really want. I could make the connection. Yes.
I have another practical question. So these were printed on different animal skins, and there's something that you do with leather called skiving, which makes the leather, which is naturally like all of our skins right now, it gets a little thicker, gets a little thinner, and so you can skive it by actually scraping it down till it gets a uniform thickness. And it makes it easier to turn it into things or to write on it or any of those things. And related to that question, I'm wondering, of what type of animals did they use for these? Goats, you mentioned, cows. What about pigs?
Of course not. But okay. So this is actually important and interesting, and there's data about it. So the first thing I wanted to say is that if you noticed, I did not use the word parchment, because parchment signifies a particular technique of preparation that was not yet achieved then. So I use the word skin because it's there's a method of scraping, but it's also the chemical procedure that goes through the skin. And this is not yet parchment. Parchment was only achieved later on in late antiquity. So this is different parts of skin. There are terms in Hebrew also for that, but this is not really parchment. So they are less developed. But I can tell you that some of the skins are actually very thin. Some of the skin, it's not always the nicest thing to speak about, but there are other ways to prepare it. Sometimes you can divide the skin in half in the width. You divide the skin in half. But I can tell you that there is one scroll written on deer skin. And it's a very thin, very luxurious, nice, costly, of course. I think it's, if I remember well, it's the temple scroll written, and this is what it was written on a deer skin. But all of them are what we call kosher animals, so no pigs.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I have a few questions. Okay, first, design questions. I have the feeling that the writing is extremely straight. I mean, do they have a grid on the paper?
Yes,
Because
they use a ruler. Before writing a sheet of skin, they would take a ruler and a dry, so not a pen, but usually like a dry instrument, and mark lines throughout the sheet. Yes,
that makes
mostly.
Okay. So now, other question on another level. All those scrolls shows, for me, an organized society in a way, because the scribes were not the one. People were dictating to the scribe. It could be the king, it could be the religious people, it could be many different people. So first, can we see an organized society through the different style, or are there any different styles in those scrolls that we can define, which would show different kind of people dictating to them? I have no idea, but just the kind of question that I have.
You're right. The question is going in the right direction, because what I was trying to show is that you could follow these material hints and understand the dynamics of society, for example. The answer is yes, but it's complicated. In the sense that, I must say, as I showed, this is moving towards stability. There is a stabilization of a Judean writing tradition. You can actually look, where is that Enoch scroll? I showed it in the beginning. Here, this one. This is very early, and this is before the Judean writing tradition has stabilized. And actually, the shapes of letters are more Aramaic than Hebrew. So this might have come from some scribe, maybe outside Judea, or maybe in Judea, but on a very early stage. So you can actually really closely follow that. So the answer is yes, but you need a lot of small, fine details to pinpoint that. Yes. Yes, some people are doing that already. Yes, you can be sure about that. Yes. Please.
Can anything be inferred about literacy or audience from like the font size, for example, whether things were meant to be read out loud or studied, on an individual basis or anything like that?
So you're absolutely right that since we're seeing a procedure of much more information contained in a sheet, and that's clearly the vector through which they're advancing. So you could speak about a systematizing of information. If you compare this scroll to this one, yes, where so much information is densely stacked on one page, I'm not sure it attests to the literacy of the entire audience in Judea. It might, but that needs a different kind of evidence. For that evidence, you need to look at maybe small scale, like ostraca or small pieces of everyday writing, not about this. But as a scholarly product, you could absolutely show that there is big, like we know today. But so there is an advance of technology that goes through, yes, a more professional and systematic mode of information, conveying information and producing it. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, here is another expert of the scrolls.
Not an expert on this, but I would say, as somebody who spent most of my life working with the contents, this is fascinating and so important. But I have a question that's always bothered me. I think you're absolutely correct. There's a Judean scribal tradition that you've kind of walked us through, and you're right that they're borrowing from, they're contributing to, they're part of the kind of. My practical question is like, how are they learning these things? Are the Judean scribes going to professional scribe, gatherings? Are they getting to this is always the black hole, the educational framework from which they learn all that. We see the after effects of all this, but can we reverse engineer, where they learned this all from?
So actually, it's a thing I didn't even get to in this lecture, but we need to ask that, because in antiquity, this was done in schools. Actually, today also it was done in schools, but it's done in schools. But when I say school in antiquity, it's a bit different. So it's not that every kid go to school, but people, even grown-ups sometimes, or children, go to schools. And actually, you can see different schools. So some people say, André Lemaire, he's got this theory that Qumran was a school. There was a scribal school placed in Qumran, and people studied there. And this is why you see that stabilizing that took place in Qumran. I'm not really sure, but for example, for that kind of question, you should look at the small items from Qumran. You have got some abecedaries, or ostraca with just letters, or just small pieces of paper with gibberish written on them, or a small piece of skin where you have three verses from Sefer Bereshit, from the book of Genesis, written upside down and from left to right and right to left, and all sorts of experiments. So there was some experimenting taking place at Qumran. I think the site had an active school in the sense of there was a creative writing discipline there. So, and an interesting thing we try to follow is, can we show that one scribe wrote many scrolls? Ada Yardeni famously claimed that there's a scribe who wrote 50 different scrolls. I think she is exaggerating, but there is consistency there. So the answer is absolutely yes, but we should do more to follow the tracks of that, of this tradition.
On that vein, the ones you were talking about earlier with the Book of Psalms, where it was separated into the stitches and columns and things, for the ones that were kind of not separated as much, is it possible that kind of in terms of scribes and writing, maybe people were just kind of almost mass producing them, just writing them in as few scrolls as possible in order to kind of get it to more people in less time?
So you would expect this to be a mass production, but this to be a more less mass?
I guess, because you're not thinking about it as you're writing it as
the
much.
point is, I mean, look, this one here is one of the fanciest scrolls in Qumran. It's one of the largest. The way we can tell what the things we examine the density of text on a page. The more blank space on a page there is, this means that there were more resources allotted to it, and people were less anxious about saving space. So I guess this is a problem for your kind of theory, because this is actually a very fancy scroll, yet it is still written in prose. So the thing might be, although this, I don't know, I would say it's a diachronic development, but this is also one of the latest scrolls from Qumran. This one was written in the mid-1st century CE, so that is just before the Roman destruction of Judea. So this is a very late scroll from Qumran, yet it keeps writing the Psalms in prose. So there's a different dynamic going on there. We still haven't, deciphered it.
Deborah has a question.
Yeah. So I think I know the answer to this, but I thought I'd just ask anyway. And that is, are there any images in any of the scrolls from Qumran?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to say, this is an imageless library.
And do you want to why? I mean, is there a reason why nobody would think to portray something?
I'm trying to think of, so it might help me if I
could say, we have no idea.
Yeah. I could say that, but I'm a scholar. I don't say that. Maybe I should. No, but I could think of an example to lead me through answering you, okay? So there's a text in Aramaic from Qumran that is, in some way, it's astronomical text, scientific text, that is in many ways a translation of an older Babylonian text from Akkadian. The Babylonian text is written like you would expect a mathematical table to appear. So it's graphically placed on the parchment, and it's in columns and in rows. It's very clear. It uses digits and so on. The one in Qumran, the Aramaic one, is written in continuous prose. It does not use digits. And it does not use digits. So even, this little drawing is written in words in Aramaic. And you can imagine how difficult it is to follow in a mathematical text that does not have digits. So some of the answer is really because the tradition was developing, and so they were not equipped to handle digits and tables and so on. But okay, but that's not what you asked. I know, I'm sorry.
Well, but to tie it together with your earlier lecture about images on rocks and carving in rocks. So images were around, the idea of creating an abstraction of something like a lion or a tree or something, the examples you gave. So those things existed conceptually, but not in a manuscript.
You're right. That tradition that I spoke about was in many ways an un-iconic tradition. You can speak about larger scale iconicity, so it might connect also what I showed on the sundials, if you recall. So Roman sundials were decorated with deities of time, and very nice big things. But the Jewish sundials from the old city, from the the Jewish quarter for the Temple Mount, they had if they had something, it was a floral design, or geometric design, or this kind of hodgepodge menorah kind of put on the sundial. So people who are more expert than me about archaeology, so material culture of Judea, would say it was a less iconic culture than the surrounding. I would support that, but maybe people could object.
Does it have to do with the law of
graven images?
Of course, so they would not show. Yeah, but that's absolutely right. They would not show images of people or animals because it's forbidden. But even without showing animals or people, there are still a lot of iconography to show without showing people or animals.
Because there's examples in numismatics much later,
or even earlier, yeah.
And how they got around that.
Yeah, numismatics. Actually, coins, that would be a topic for another lecture with somebody more expert than I am. Yeah, very important. Yeah, please.
Thank you again, Jonathan. Just a wonderful lecture. So following up on this, I am wondering, certainly in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, there are diagrams and there are representations. In Judea and to some extent in ancient Israel, there seem not to be, but there's not a lot of data there. I'm wondering whether we should perhaps connect this to, the beginning of Aseret HaDibrot, the beginning of the Decalogue, which is specifically Israelite and Jewish, or rather maybe we should connect this with Northwest Semitic culture more broadly, which, as Mettinger and other people have shown, tends to be aniconic. So I'm wondering, do you happen to know, is this somewhat surprising absence of pictures or diagrams, which I had never thought about until you asked this question, and then I realized it was just a wonderful question that for decades I'd never asked that. It's a wonderful question. Is that absence the case specifically in the Dead Sea Scrolls and other Jewish material, or do you happen to know, does it show up even earlier in other Northwest Semitic contexts, in Phoenician, in Aramaic? I mean, offhand, I can't think of examples where you have diagrams or pictures in the way that you do have in Egyptian and Mesopotamian culture. And maybe the connection has something to do not just with ancient Israel or the Jews, but with the aniconism of Northwest Semitic.
So I think, Professor Sommer, I think you're in the position to answer that question much more than I am. But I can't think. I mean, we have very little Phoenician evidence and Northwest Semitic in general. But the thing that comes in mind is amulets and magic. So you do have something like Arselantash. There is some kind of iconic there, and actually Jewish amulets from maybe Second Temple period or later, they start getting more magic. The genre of writing amulets is really attracting a lot of iconography. Yes. So much more than the Psalms. The Psalms that needed to wait until the Middle Ages to get the drawings. But magic was really a lot more engaging in that respect.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for being with us these past 3 days, and thank you so much, Jonathan Ben-Dov, for this amazing lecture series.
I want to thank Jonathan and to say that we'll have 3 wonderful lectures in the fall as part of the Leon Levy Foundation Lectures in Jewish Material Culture here at BGC. So please check your inbox when those get announced. I think the first one is in October. And we hope to see you all back at BGC for more wonderful events like this. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.